March 14th, 1941. Ezekiel Zeke Harwood stepped into the Savoy Ballroom and poured scalding coffee over Bumpy Johnson's shoulder. 200 witnesses froze. They waited for the gunshot, for blood, for an instant end, but Bumpy merely wiped the coffee streak and said, 100. 100 minutes later, Harwood's body was found in Brooklyn with exactly 100 bullet holes. To understand why what seemed like a trivial act led to a foreordained death, the story must begin right at that moment in the Savoy that night. Savoy Ballroom, Harlem, March 14th, 1941, 9:12 p.m. The swing music stopped mid-beat as the Southern man entered. He walked through the tables, holding a hot coffee cup, his eyes trying to hold on to the confidence he had rehearsed for 3 weeks. Ezekiel Harwood, Grand Dragon of a KKK branch from South Carolina, carried the delusion of Southern power to Harlem like a protective charm. He believed that superiority would shield him anywhere, even in the place black people had turned into their spiritual capital. He stopped at Bumpy's table, a single flick of the wrist. The boiling coffee slid down the shoulder of the suit. A thin wisp of steam rose. 200 people held their breath. Every sound in the Savoy was sucked away as if the room awaited a verdict. Bumpy lifted the napkin, wiped his shoulder, wiped his collar, then he folded the napkin into a neat, firm square and placed it on the table. He looked at Harwood. That moment sliced through the air like a blade. 100, Bumpy said. His voice was low but so cold that even those standing far away heard every word clearly. Harwood froze for a second, then forced a stiff smile. What did you just say? 100. The number Harlem will find you with. Harwood tried to laugh louder to drown the fear creeping into his chest. One of the 4 men near him froze when he saw Bumpy raise his hand in a simple signal, a gesture so plain the entire room understood that the night was not ending here. It was only beginning. What the 200 people in the Savoy did not know was that this story had been prepared 3 weeks earlier. In Greenville, South Carolina, Harwood received orders from the KKK, find a black symbol in New York, publicly humiliate him, bring back proof as a spiritual victory for the South. When the name Bumpy Johnson came up, Harwood chose immediately. He wanted to shatter a legend right where that legend reigned. He chose the Savoy Ballroom because it was the symbol of freedom, a place where black people bowed to no one. He chose coffee because he thought outright violence too risky, while coffee would insult without drawing police attention. He chose a crowded night to ensure the lesson spread far. He believed that anywhere in America, a white man could still humiliate a black man without consequences. That confidence was not courage, it was an illusion poured into him from the place he came from. He did not understand that Harlem operated by a different code. That night, after pouring the coffee, Harwood turned and walked out amid the dead silence of the Savoy. He believed Bumpy was afraid, believed he had won, believed those 200 black people had to swallow the shame because of him. But every eye in that room followed his back, like watching someone who had just crossed a line. No one survived crossing. Bumpy stayed seated at the table. He adjusted his cuff, took a drag on his cigarette. Eyes calm, Bumpy said just one thing. Time's up. To those who knew Bumpy, that was the moment fate locked shut. The clock on the Savoy wall began counting down. The final 100 minutes of Ezekiel Harwood's life. But to understand what happened next, why a man who once believed himself untouchable ended up in a Brooklyn warehouse, his body riddled with 100 bullets, must go back further than the Savoy. It requires understanding Harlem in 1941. It requires understanding the man named Bumpy Johnson, who built an empire not with violence, but with intellect, patience, and the kind of power men like Harwood only recognized when it was far too late. Harlem in 1941 was a world both radiant and fractured. World War was raging across the ocean, while here on Lenox, 135th and 7th Avenue, the streets remained packed with people looking for work that no one would give them. Unemployment hung over every family like a heavy cloud. Racism was no longer as blatant as in the South, but beneath the city's glossy veneer were countless doors slammed shut the moment a black person approached. Upscale restaurants still refused service, major companies still refused to hire, banks still refused loans. Harlem was poor, hungry, overcrowded, yet strangely, it burned with a pride no other place possessed. Harlem people might not have money, but they had music, their own language, streets that knew how to laugh and how to fight back, and most importantly, they had each other. In that context emerged a man the entire neighborhood mentioned with a mixture of respect and security. Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy was not police, not a politician, yet he achieved what no official organization of the time could. He kept Harlem standing firm amid chaos. In conflicts between small gangs, Bumpy was the one both sides called to mediate. He never raised his voice, but everyone knew arguments stopped the moment he placed his hand on the table. For black businesses, barbershops, restaurants, laundries, bars, he was the invisible shield. One protection payment to Bumpy was not buying safety, it was buying a promise. No one is allowed to harass Harlem people on Harlem ground. The elders called him the unwritten law, because some things did not need to be posted on City Hall bulletin boards. They existed in the way people walked, in the way voices lowered when his name was spoken, in the way matters were settled with order. No one admitted, but everyone followed. Bumpy's power did not come from guns. A gun only showed you could shoot. Bumpy showed he could keep people from having to shoot. He did not need to prove he was dangerous. He proved others felt safe in his presence. That was the kind of power no gang could buy, no politician could learn, and no police ever achieved. It came from the community's consensus, from thousands of Harlem people deciding, if someone has to speak for us to the outside world, it's Bumpy. When city government abandoned Harlem to poverty and violence, when police treated black people as problems rather than citizens, Bumpy was the one who maintained minimal order, not the order of law, but the order of survival. In Harlem's eyes, Bumpy was the only one credible enough to make violent men fear, and moral enough not to abuse it into cruelty. So insulting Bumpy in front of Harlem people was not just insulting him. It was a slap to the entire neighborhood, a declaration that outsiders could trample their dignity without paying a price. Harlem could endure poverty, endure discrimination, endure contemptuous stares when entering Manhattan, but there was one thing they never endured: watching someone humiliate their representative. The night Harwood poured scalding coffee on Bumpy's shoulder at the Savoy, the 200 present did not react. They stayed silent. That silence was not fear. It was the silence of people who had seen Harlem's order operate hundreds of times before. They knew what would come next. They knew Harwood had just signed his own sentence without understanding it. They knew no one insulted Bumpy, turned their back and walked away unscathed. When Harwood left the Savoy, with the stride of a man who thought he had won, 200 eyes followed him, not with hatred, but with cold certainty. No one pours coffee on Harlem's man and walks away in peace. In that moment, without law, Harlem had decided, and Harlem's decision had never been wrong. In 1915, Charleston, South Carolina, Bumpy Johnson was only 10 years old. Returning home with his parents and 2 siblings after market, they were stopped by a group of KKK men. 6 hooded figures stepped into the dirt road, no questions, just the command, "Kneel." Bumpy watched his father stand among them. He did not kneel, but he did not advance either. His wife and 3 children behind him were the reason. One wrong move could cost a price no one in the family could bear. His father said one very quiet sentence, "I have a wife and children." That did not satisfy the KKK group, but it made them pause. They wanted to subdue a man, but not cause trouble in front of women and children. They left after a few threats, leaving boot prints in the dirt and fear mixed in the chest of the child named Ellsworth Johnson. That night, Bumpy could not sleep. He lay still, listening to the insects outside the window and watching his father's shadow pace the room. Finally, his father sat on the edge of the bed and spoke not loudly but clearly, as if passing to his son the most important thing a father could leave. "You saw it today," he said. "Sometimes winning is not fighting back. Sometimes winning is surviving to fight another day." Bumpy listened. His father continued, "A real man knows when to choose his moment. Not every insult is the moment to strike back. You strike when you need to, not when you're forced to." Those were not lofty philosophies. They were the experience of a black man living in a land where his life was not protected by law. The path to protect family was not about defeating the stronger, but knowing when to stay silent and when to stand tall. That lesson carved itself into Bumpy for life. From age 10, he understood patience was not weakness. It was a weapon for those who could not afford mistakes. Growing up with Harlem, he did not become impulsive. He observed first, decided later. He did not react to insults. He reacted to intent. He did not punish words. He punished when someone touched the dignity of the community he stood for. And so, when Ezekiel Harwood poured coffee on his shoulder at the Savoy 30 years later, Bumpy did not get angry. He saw the act as a door opening to the moment his father once spoke of. Hot coffee on the suit was only surface. The intent beneath was the answer. Harwood wanted to humiliate a black man before 200 witnesses, wanted to carry that image back south, wanted to prove he could do it in Harlem without paying. But Harwood did not understand what Bumpy had learned as a child. Being insulted was not the moment to act. The moment to act was when you decided to end the story. Bumpy wiped his shoulder, set the napkin down, looked up at him and said, 100. Outsiders heard only a number. Those in the Savoy heard something else. This was the chosen time. Not from fleeting anger, but because Bumpy had seen what his father saw in Charleston. Some men do not stop just because you stay silent. Some men must be stopped by your own hand. And that was when the old lesson became instinct. 3 weeks before the Savoy night, one quiet afternoon at the corner of 140th, Slim Anderson, longtime Savoy waiter, sought out Bumpy Johnson. Slim never spoke much, but that day, as soon as he saw Bumpy enter Small's barbershop, he approached and said, "There's a Southern guy asking about showtimes at the Savoy. Asking about where Bumpy usually sits." That was all. Slim knew those 2 pieces were enough for Bumpy to understand. Bumpy only smiled as if a door had finally opened at the right time. He replied, "Let him come." To outsiders, it sounded indifferent, but those who knew Bumpy understood when he said, "Let him come," everything had already been decided. That night, Bumpy sat in the back room of Minton's Playhouse, where jazz mixed with cigarette smoke like a familiar backdrop. He called his 4 most trusted, Junie Bird, mind sharp as a razor. Illinois Gordon, hands stronger than sledgehammers. Raymond Quick, the one who could tail a shadow from Harlem to the Bronx without leaving a trace. And Selma Red Carter, the woman who read human psychology so well she could tell what a man was about to do just by watching his fingers tap. When all four sat down, Bumpy said one sentence: "We have a guest." Junie raised an eyebrow. The kind who knows his place, or the kind looking for trouble? Bumpy answered, "The kind who thinks Harlem runs like Mississippi." Illinois shrugged. Raymond stayed silent. Only Selma smiled faintly. He won't like the truth. Bumpy set his cigar in the ashtray. The goal is not to kill him. The goal is to let him step over the line in front of 200 people. For Bumpy, death was not the message. The mistake was the message. A perfect trap did not push the opponent into a corner. It made the opponent step in himself, thinking he was the hunter. Harwood had only just arrived in Harlem, yet Bumpy already saw him clearly as if reading a long-prepared map. He was the type who believed power lay in skin color and ancestral history, not in how you controlled the room. That type was the most predictable. Over the next 3 weeks, Harwood was watched without ever knowing. Raymond trailed him from hotel to diner, from diner to ferry, from ferry to secret meetings with 2 other Southerners living in New York. No confrontation, just observation. All details filed into Raymond's razor-sharp memory: what Harwood drank, who he spoke to, how he rubbed his necklace when tense, how he walked slightly off balance from an old broken ankle. Junie analyzed every move. He asks about the Savoy because he wants a stage, wants something everyone has to witness. This type always needs an audience. Selma added, "The one who needs an audience is the easiest to lead." Illinois said only one thing: when he acts, his shoulder will dip slightly. Easy to read. And Bumpy, he just listened. He let each piece fall into place, forming the shape of a man he had never met. That was how Bumpy Johnson worked. Understand the opponent before the opponent realized he was being watched. Every night, he walked along Lenox Avenue, past the Savoy, observing the flow of people, not to guard against Harwood, but to feel the exact moment. Bumpy never created battles. He let battles come to him. Harwood thought he chose his target, but in truth, he walked exactly where Bumpy wanted him to go. The 3 weeks of preparation were not for violence, they were for certainty. To ensure that when Harwood touched Bumpy, he would do it in front of enough people that he left himself no escape. He thought he was humiliating Harlem. In Bumpy's eyes, he was only doing one thing: stepping into the praise position himself. And on the night of March 14th, when Slim reported Harwood had appeared at the Savoy door, adjusting his collar and stepping in with a hot coffee cup in hand, Bumpy knew the game had reached the exact segment it needed. Seattle has rain, Chicago has wind, but Harlem has something else: traps that fools never see until it's too late. Harwood entered the Savoy, intending to humiliate, but in that very moment, a 3-week plan closed like a trap, snapping shut at the perfect time, and Harwood, without knowing, became the last to hear the sound of its lock clicking closed. When the Savoy Ballroom door closed behind Ezekiel Harwood, the minute hand on the clock had just ticked to 1. That was the first minute of his final 100 minutes. A man who once believed he walked, protected by the invisible shield of his skin, suddenly felt something following him, very close, very silent. Minute 0:10. Harwood walked quickly down the sidewalk, his shoes tapping hurriedly, but another sound chased behind, not clear, just a repeating rhythm, enough to make him realize it was not his own footsteps echoing. He looked back. No one, but when he continued, the sound returned. He sped up. The following sound sped up. He stopped. It stopped. His heart pounded hard in his chest. This was no longer the confidence of the untouchable. This was the praise instinct. Knowing eyes were on the back of his neck. Minute 10, 20. Harwood rushed to a public phone booth at 138th Street corner, lifted the receiver. He dialed the police, voice trembling but trying to hold authority. I'm being threatened. A black man is following me. Send someone now. Silence on the other end. Then a voice, name, address, reason. Harwood spoke fast, emphasizing he was from the South and could contact superiors. Silence again. Finally the voice replied, no incident, we're busy. Then the line went dead. Harwood stood stunned. The lifelong feeling that police would protect him vanished. This city did not see him as a white man deserving priority. This city saw him as non-existent. Minute 20, 40. Harwood walked fast, then nearly ran along Lenox Avenue. He saw a white-owned grocery store ahead, lights still on. He rushed over, pounded the door. Open up. I need to get inside. The owner, an old man, looked through the crack and shook his head. No, Harwood pounded harder. I'll pay. I just need to hide for a few minutes. The answer remained, not getting involved with Harlem. The door slammed shut. He ran on to a liquor store, shooed away. Only now did Harwood understand. Leaving the Savoy did not mean escaping the net closing around him. This was not one man's affair. This was Harlem's affair, and Harlem had decided. Minute 40, 60. Harwood ran into the street, raising his hand for a taxi. One approached, lights on. The driver saw him, slowed. He opened his mouth. To Brooklyn. I'll pay triple. The taxi sped past, leaving him in the middle of the road. Then the next. Then the third. All looked at him and turned away. No one wanted to get involved with a man who had just humiliated Harlem in front of 200 people. He looked around. Passing faces acted as if they did not see him. A woman walking with her child pulled the child to the side, eyes cold. A group of young men at the corner stood silent. No one helped him, but no one touched him either. That was the most terrifying part. Minute 60, 80. Footsteps sounded again, closer, steadier, heavier. Harwood sped up, running along the avenue. The footsteps behind did not run. They only walked, yet each step closed the gap, as if unbound by speed. Harwood looked back. No one. But he knew. Those sounds did not belong to the night. They belonged to the eyes watching him like an animal nearing the end of its path. The city became alien. The yellow streetlights seemed to side with the follower rather than him. Harwood ran like the hunted, and he was. Minute 80, 100. He neared the ferry, crossed streets, headed toward the Brooklyn Bridge. Breath ragged, mind spinning. Only one thought left. Get out of Harlem. He turned down a small road leading into the Red Hook warehouse district. Streetlights dim, shadows stretching like open doors. The footsteps behind vanished completely. That silence was more terrifying than when they were present. Harwood turned. No one. Then he turned forward. 3 figures stood there. Selma. Red Carter leaned against the wall. Illinois Gordon blocked the path. Raymond Quick stood with arms crossed, watching him, like watching a mistake, slowly realizing itself. No one drew a gun. They just stood, enough for him to know there was no way out. He backed up, but 2 more figures had appeared behind. None of them touched him. He collapsed to his knees first. He understood last, when the 100th minute passed. Ezekiel Harwood vanished from Harlem's night so quietly that none of the 200 Savoy witnesses could describe which way he went. None of the 200 reported to police. To Harlem, he had never existed. To Bumpy, he had completed his only role in life, the prey who walked into the precisely timed trap, and the city had chosen who would die that night. The Red Hook warehouse sat right at the water's edge. Inside warehouse number 12, there was only one thing: silence thick as if canned. The fluorescent tube light on the ceiling flickered faintly, flashing in rhythm, casting weary pools of light on the stained concrete floor. Each flicker stretched, then shrank shadows like a soul trapped between light and dark. Ezekiel Harwood sat on a metal chair in the center of the room, wrists tied to an old wheel. He breathed rapidly, eyes wide, sweat dripping down his collar. But no one in that warehouse paid attention to his panic. Those standing around only watched quietly, as if waiting for the start of a preordained ceremony. The iron door at the corner opened. The sound was not loud, but enough to turn every eye. Bumpy Johnson stepped in, stride steady and calm, as if entering a meeting room, rather than a place, deciding a life. The dim light made his long coat cast a shadow across the floor like dark ink. Bumpy did not look at Harwood immediately. He scanned the room, the position of each person, the distances, the silence, a check only those accustomed to command performed. Then he stopped in front of Harwood, hand resting lightly on the back of the chair, as if this were just a conversation between two men. No anger, no shouting, no heavy breathing. He said, "Now you understand why I didn't lose my temper at the Savoy." Harwood opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Bumpy took a folded sheet of paper from his inside pocket. He unfolded it. The paper rustled softly, but in the dead quiet room, the sound was like a knife being sharpened. "The list," Bumpy said. 100 names. He looked down at the page, reading each line in a flat voice, like reading contest entrants. No emotion, just bare truth, spoken aloud. Sarah Whitlock, 8 years old, parents hanged in front of their home. Mary Thompson, 27 years old, house burned for helping others vote. William Carter, 63 years old, beaten to death outside church. Isaiah Brooks, 19 years old. Samuel Reeves, 41 years old. Clarence Johnson, 32 years old. The list continued. 100 names. 100 lives cut short by hatred. 100 stories Harwood and men like him called order. Harwood shook violently. I had nothing to do with them," he tried to say, voice breaking on the first word. Bumpy folded the paper and put it away. "You don't need to, you represent." Then he turned to those standing around, not his own men, not his people, but those Harwood had touched, had threatened during his 3 weeks wandering New York. The laundromat owner Harwood called a servant, only fit to stand outside the door. The taxi driver he yelled at for not opening the door fast enough. The man at the grocery store, Harwood said, "Not the kind of customer I need to see." 3 Harlem people Harwood treated like trash, and beside them, 3 from South Carolina, people who had lost loved ones to Harwood's KKK branch. People who carried too much loss that the law had never named. Bumpy looked at each one, then said one simple sentence, 1 bullet each. No one asked more. The reason lay in every name Bumpy had just read. Harwood began to cry, not from pain, from understanding. He understood this was not killing him for revenge. This was where the city collected its debt. Illinois Gordon opened an iron box. Inside lay a colt on black cloth. One bullet was placed in the first person's hand, the laundromat owner. She did not tremble. She only closed her eyes, as if remembering something Harwood could never understand, then squeezed the trigger. A short, clean shot. Metal clinked on concrete. One bullet. The next person stepped forward. One bullet, then the third. Harwood did not scream. He could not scream. The horror enveloping him produced no sound, as if his voice had been ripped from his throat when he entered the alley leading to this warehouse. Each shot rang like a period, ending a story that should have ended long ago. Bumpy stood there, eyes never leaving. He only witnessed. His role was not executioner. He was the one holding the scale. Each person stepped up once. One bullet, one reason, one memory, all in silence. After the 70th bullet, the warehouse held only Harwood's heavy breathing and the continuing hum of the fluorescent light. After the 90th, Harwood was only a shape of pure fear, no more arrogance, no more faith in the skin that once shielded him. The 91st, 92nd, 93rd, no one counted aloud, but everyone knew. When the last person stepped forward, an old man from South Carolina who lost his grandson to Harwood's group. The old man placed the bullet in the colt with trembling hands, but eyes steady as steel. He said exactly 2 words, "For him," then pulled the trigger. The 100th bullet. The sound echoed off the walls, up to the ceiling, then sank into the concrete as if it had never existed. And in that moment, there was something special. Not a single scream, only the light, dry clink of spent casings hitting the floor. A cold, bare sound, yet so real the entire room understood. Justice, sometimes, is not light. It is balance, returned from darkness. Bumpy looked at Harwood's body for a few seconds, as if confirming the scale had closed, ending a chain the law had never touched. He turned, pulled up his collar, and said to Illinois, "Clean this place up. Tomorrow morning, leave him in Brooklyn." Then he walked out of the warehouse, leaving behind a night Harlem would never name, but would never forget the meaning of. At 6:45 a.m. the next morning, a dock worker, passing the Brooklyn Navy Yard, found Ezekiel Harwood's body leaning against a brick wall, tilted to one side, as if sleeping off a drunk night. But his clothes were torn in patches, his body riddled with bullet holes, his gray coat soaked in dried blood. The scene was so quiet, it chilled the spine, as if someone had laid him down with all the precision of a ritual. When police arrived, they found a small note pinned to his chest with a tiny pin. White paper, neat handwriting, 100, for 100, who no longer have a voice. The message was clear enough for readers to understand. This was not an ordinary murder. It was an indictment. The city wrote for itself. NYPD cordoned off the area. Curious onlookers formed a circle, but no one dared step too close. A young officer asked the worker, "Did you hear anything earlier?" The worker shook his head. "No shots." That made the officer frown. 100 bullets in the night, and no one heard. No one called. The lead detective walked the scene, hands on hips, looking at mixed footprints in the concrete. They asked nearby residents. The answers repeated. "Didn't see anything. I was sleeping. I was on night shift. Maybe he was killed somewhere else and brought here." No one seemed concerned. The scene felt as if this death did not belong to them. It belonged to someone elsewhere. One officer looked at the note again. He did not fully understand, but guessed this was not simple, so he called higher-ups. But news of the death traveled faster than any report. Just hours later, in Manhattan, the Bronx, Queens, in diners, newsstands, barbershops, people asked the same question. Who dared kill a white man right in New York? But they did not ask long, because the message on the paper spread faster than rumors. People knew Harwood had appeared at the Savoy the night before. People knew he poured coffee on Bumpy Johnson's shoulder. People knew 200 witnesses saw it, and all 200 did the same thing without coordination, said nothing about what happened. When police came to the Savoy asking, staff replied, "Last night was peaceful." Bar staff said, "No fights." Dancers on the floor said, "Didn't see anyone cause trouble." That was not criminal complicity. It was a community's consensus. Consensus that some things were better left for Harlem to handle Harlem's way. By noon, word reached Little Italy. A few gangsters who knew Bumpy heard and simply said, "Harlem protects its own. Don't get involved." Word reached bigger mafia families. Same reaction. No one brings the Klan into New York. They did not say it out of morality, but because they understood the underworld order. Humiliating someone of Bumpy's stature in front of his community creates chaos, and no boss wanted chaos. Word reached black barbershops, laundries, grocery stores. No one rejoiced at the death. They only nodded. A small nod, carrying the feeling of safety restored, as if Harlem had shaken off something dirty that had touched it. Word reached city government offices, and then stopped. No one spoke publicly, no press release, because speaking would force them to answer the most important question they dared not touch. Why could a man be killed just hours after insulting a Harlem man? And finally, word returned to where it began, the Savoy Ballroom. That night, music played again. People danced again. Life continued. No one mentioned Harwood, but everyone understood, from now on, no one brings the KKK into Harlem and leaves whole. And more importantly, no one white or black, rich or poor, gangster or elite, was allowed to humiliate Bumpy Johnson on his ground. That Brooklyn morning recorded one dead body. Harlem recorded something else. The boundary had just been redrawn, bolder, and when Harlem drew a boundary, the whole city knew which side to stand on. News of Ezekiel Harwood's death spread through the city faster than the morning papers, not because of who he was. In New York, an anonymous Southern guy made no waves, but because of the paper pinned to his coat. 100, for 100 who no longer have a voice. And without anyone saying it, the whole city guessed whose hand was behind it. In Little Italy, when the news reached a Genovese family associate, he stood silent a few seconds before reporting up. A small meeting took place right in a Mulberry Street coffee shop. An older man lit his cigar, took a drag, and said what everyone knew. Harlem belongs to Harlem. No one argued. The mafia understood the city's unwritten law. Territory was not just land, it was people, and Harlem people had chosen Bumpy as their boundary. Challenging that boundary was not wise. Harlem thought he was the stone thrown into a still pond, but the Genovese saw the true nature. He had thrown himself into the heart of Harlem. An outsider's death was small. An outsider daring to challenge a neighborhood symbol dying, that was a warning. And in the underworld, warnings always carried more weight than violence. At NYPD headquarters, the Harwood file landed on a middle-aged detective's desk. He looked at the body photo, the note, the scene report, then closed it, not for lack of clues, but because he understood pursuing it meant digging into ground even police dared not claim to control. "Trouble," he muttered. A younger officer asked, "So do we open an investigation?" He placed his hand on the file, pushed it to the corner of the desk. "Investigate what? Does the victim have any ties to New York? Who knows him? Who saw him? Who reported him missing? No motive, no witnesses. The captain stood up. You want to pursue this? You willing to knock on every door in Harlem? I'm not. The file was closed. A case never opened. In Harlem, the story spread differently. Harlem people were not the type to rejoice at death, even an enemy's death. But that morning, as laundries, barbershops, and eateries opened, people looked at each other with unspoken understanding. A quiet relief flowed through the streets. No one said Bumpy did right. They only said things are calm again. Harlem lived in a city that always saw them as the lowest tier, where police sought them for questioning more than protection, where companies rejected them, where laws never belonged to them. In that circumstance, order existed only when someone held it with hand, eye, and reputation, and that someone was Bumpy Johnson. Every Harlem child knew one thing: as long as Bumpy stood, Harlem would not be swallowed. When Harwood was found in Brooklyn, Harlem did not see revenge. They saw balance restored. An outsider came, carrying contempt from where he was born, insulted the man Harlem trusted most, then died in a place belonging to outsiders. That made them understand once more that Bumpy did not just protect streets from crime, he protected the neighborhood's honor. A newsstand woman said, "If police could do that, we wouldn't need Bumpy." A taxi driver chuckled softly. Harwood didn't die for pouring coffee on someone. He died for pouring coffee in the wrong place. A coffee shop owner said, "In Harlem we don't need warning signs. We know the boundaries ourselves," and that boundary was Bumpy Johnson. In lunchtime conversations, men spoke indirectly, women spoke little, youth spoke more than necessary, but all circled the same point. No one was allowed to humiliate Bumpy, because humiliating Bumpy was humiliating Harlem. Elsewhere in the city, people talked mafia, police, conspiracy, but in Harlem they said only one thing: he keeps us safe, in a way no one else ever has, and that, rather than 100 bullets, was why the name Bumpy Johnson continued to be spoken with respect, mixed with caution. Not because he was the most fearsome, but because he was the only one who made Harlem no longer have to fear anyone else. 1 month after Harwood died in Brooklyn, the Savoy Ballroom lit up again like every weekend night. Swing music returned, shoes sliding on wood returned, couples nestling together returned. But something else was different. The atmosphere, not an atmosphere of fear, but of understanding. Understanding that a boundary had been drawn with one sentence and one decision no one in Harlem needed to debate. That night, when Bumpy Johnson stepped into the Savoy, the musicians did not stop, dancers did not miss a beat, waiters did not drop trays. They simply shifted to give him path, as if he were a large stream no one wanted to block. A few eyes met his for 1 second, then moved away. Not from fear. Anyone who witnessed the night Harwood insulted him understood: if Bumpy wanted to kill, he would have done it right at the Savoy. What they saw in him was not death, it was control, calmness, the terrifying precision of a man who knew exactly who needed to be lost and who needed to be protected. And so they did not look because of awe. They avoided his eyes out of respect. Bumpy chose his usual table in the corner, ordered coffee as always. He lifted the cup, the hot coffee aroma rising in the room. No one spoke, but everyone remembered another moment. 1 month earlier, when coffee was not a symbol of calm but the spark for a sentence. But tonight, he took a sip, set the cup down, as if that story had never happened to him, only to Harlem. The storyteller in one corner of the room watched him, then thought, Bumpy did not kill Ezekiel Harwood. Harlem killed him. Those he insulted, the Southern families destroyed by the KKK, the Harlem people who witnessed him pour coffee on Bumpy's shoulder, all of them put their hand to one bullet in the Red Hook warehouse. Bumpy only stood there to speak for them. 100, a number, a promise, an execution order, and Harlem carried it out. Order returned not because of Harwood's death, but because Harlem knew the man they trusted always stood in the right place, in front when danger came, and behind when things needed to go quiet. When Bumpy stood to leave the Savoy, yellow lights fell on his back, stretching his shadow long across the wood floor. He walked through the dancers, through the tables of drinks, through the wailing trumpet, without needing anyone to notice him. But everyone knew he was there. Everyone felt his presence like Harlem's second heartbeat, low, deep, steady. He stepped out of the Savoy and merged into Harlem's night, where streetlights pooled on brick, where his footsteps marked the return of a man the whole city respected. But in that moment, anyone watching knew Bumpy Johnson walked like a king of a kingdom, not marked on any map, but everyone living in it knew its boundaries were defined by one sentence, 100 bullets, and one night when Harlem stayed silent, but never overlooked. If you like this noir gangster storytelling style, subscribe to follow so you don't miss the next stories. Thank you for reading. See you in the next journey.